Hello, everyone, and happy holidays. All right, so for our class today, as you can see, I'm here in my office. Um, yeah, so, um, but today we have, because it's the holidays, and if you want to know more about other holidays as well, such as Hanukkah or Kwanzaa that go on during this time, please let me know. But I thought it'd be interesting to do kind of the history of Santa Claus. Because it's the holiday season, and uh, sometimes people get confused, and there's lots of varying stories when it comes to, Santa Claus, who Santa Claus really was, um, and then kind of the popularity, how it grew, and things like that. So, it's just a fun history to learn about. So we'll go over kind of who the real Santa Claus was, the real Santa Claus, that actually was a real person, um, and things like that. So let's get started. Okay, here we go. Sorry, I can see things in my screen. But, yeah. Yeah, look, yoga mats. We got to get back to yoga class. All right. So, Santa Claus, otherwise known as Saint Nicholas or Kris Kringle, um, stepped in Chris. Has a long history steeped in Christmas traditions. Today, he is thought of mainly as the jolly man in the red who brings toys to good girls and boys on Christmas Eve, but his story stretches all the way back to the 3rd century, when St. Nicholas walked the earth and became the patron saint of children. And find out more about the history of Santa Claus from his earliest origins to the shopping mall. I don't know, that's a weird transition there. From the shopping mall Santas of today, and discovered how two New Yorkers, Clement Clark Moore and Thomas Nast, were major influences on the Santa Claus millions of children wait for each Christmas Eve. Sorry, things set up strangely. So the legend of Saint Nick, or Nicholas, sorry, the real Santa Claus. So the legend of Santa Claus can be traced back hundreds of years to a monk named Saint Nicholas. It is believed that Nicholas was born sometime around 280 A.D. in Patara, near Myra in modern day Turkey. Much admired for his piety and kindness, Saint Nicholas became the subject of many legends. It is said that he gave away all of his inherited wealth and traveled the countryside helping the poor and the sick, like saints do. One of the best known St. Nicholas stories is a time he saved three poor sisters from being sold into slavery or prostitution by their father by providing them with a dowry so that they could actually get married instead of the former. And over the course of many years, Nicholas's popularity spread, and he became known as the protector of children and sailors. His feast day is celebrated on the anniversary of his death, which was December 6th. And this was traditionally considered a lucky day to make large purchases or to get married. Good to know. By the Renaissance, St. Nicholas was the most popular saint in Europe. Even after the Protestant Reformation, when the veneration of saints began to be discouraged, St. Nicholas maintained a positive reputation, especially in Holland. And you can always do more research yourself. Now, so that's St. Nicholas. Now there's something called Sinterklaas. So that's it's German, but Sinterklaas. And this says Sinterklaas comes to New York. Okay, so St. Nicholas made his first inroads into American popular culture towards the end of the 18th century. And in December of 1773, remember, He was born in 208, 284 AD. So, a New York newspaper reported that groups of Dutch families had gathered to honor the anniversary of his death, December 6th. The name Santa Claus evolved from Nick's Dutch nickname. Oh, so it's Dutch. I'm sorry. Sinterklaas. A short form of Sint Nicholas, Dutch for Saint Nicholas. In 1804, John Pintard, a member of the New York Historical Society, distributed woodcuts of St. Nicholas at the Society's annual meeting. The background of the engraving contains now familiar Santa images, including stockings filled with toys and fruit hung over the fireplace, which, of course, eventually became the stockings. Oh, sorry, that's what they just said. My bad. In 1809, Washington Irving helped to popularize the Sinterklaas stories when he referred to St. Nicholas as the patron of Saint of New York in his book, The History of New York. As his prominence grew, Sinterklaas was described as everything from a rascal with a blue three-cornered hat, red waistcoat, and yellow stockings, to a man wearing a broad-brimmed hat, a huge pair of Flemish and a huge pair of Flemish trunk hose. So just the hose that people wear sometimes, men and women apparently. And then shopping mall Santas, or however anybody wants to dress. Shopping mall Santas. All right, so gift giving, mainly centered around children, has been an important part of the Christmas celebration since the holiday's rejuvenation in the early 19th century. Stores began to advertise Christmas shopping in 1820, and by the 1840s, newspapers were creating separate sections for holiday advertisements, which often featured images of the newly popular Santa Claus. So it wasn't until the 1800s that it went from Sinterklaas to Santa Claus. In 1841, thousands of children visited a Philadelphia shop to see a life-size Santa Claus model. It was only a matter of time before stores began to attract children and their parents with the lure of a peek at a live Santa Claus. In the early 1890s, the Salvation Army needed money to pay for the free Christmas meals they provided to needy families. They began dressing up employed men in Santa Claus suits and sending them out into the streets of New York to solicit donations. And those familiar Salvation Army Santas have been ringing bells on the street corners of American cities ever since. So sometimes you'll see Santa Claus standing next to kind of like a red bucket for people to put their money into, and Santa be ringing a bell, to kind of help out. How about, families that they could, have gifts for their kids, things like that. And perhaps the most iconic department store Santa is Kris Kringle in the 1947 Santa Claus movie Miracle on 34th Street. I do suggest you watch it. It's actually interestingly philosophical. Young Natalie Wood played a little girl who believes Kris Kringle, played by Edmund Gwenn, who won an Oscar for the role, when she says he is the real Santa Claus. Miracle on 34th Street was remade in 1994 and starred Lord Richard Attenborough and Mara Wilson, which sounds good, but I would watch the original if I were you. It's nice, it's in black and white. The Macy's Santa has appeared at almost every Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade since it began in 1924. And fans of all ages line up to meet the Macy's Santa in New York City and at stores around the country where children can take pictures on Santa's lap and tell him what they want for Christmas. So that's been going on for a long time. Sorry, something went wrong here. fix it. Okay, there we go. Ah, okay, so next section. "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." Classic poem. So in 1822, Clement Mark Clark Moore, an Episcopal minister, wrote a long Christmas poem for his three daughters entitled An Account of a Visit from St. Nicholas, more popularly known as The Night Before Christmas. Moore's poem, which he was initially hesitant to publish due to the frivolous nature of its subject, is largely responsible for our modern image of Santa Claus as a right jolly old elf with a portly figure and the supernatural ability to ascend a chimney with a mere nod of his head. Although some of Moore's imagery was probably borrowed from other sources, his poem helped popularize the now familiar image of Santa Claus who flew from house to house on Christmas Eve in a miniature sleigh led by 8 flaming reindeer to leave presents for deserving children. An account of a visit from St. Nicholas created a new, immediately popular American icon. So when you see that picture of Santa with a Coke, with his rosy cheeks and all that, well, we can thank um, Clement Clark Moore. Oh, one more. All right, little break there. Had to get some clarification about some stuff. But anyway, so back to what we were doing. In 1881, political cartoonist Thomas Nast drew on Moore's poem to create the first likeness that matches our modern image of Santa Claus. His cartoon, which appeared in Harper's Weekly, depicted Santa as a round, cheerful man with a full white beard holding a sack laden with toys for lucky children, for lucky, good children. It is Nast who gave Santa his bright red suit trimmed with white fur, North Pole workshop, elves, and his wife, Mrs. Claus. So actually, that's probably where the Coca-Cola ads came from more. Now, Santa Claus around the world. This is the fun one. So 18th century America's Santa Claus was not only a St. Nicholas-inspired gift giver to make an appearance at Christmas time. There are similar figures and Christmas traditions around the world. Chris Kind, or Chris Kringle, was believed to deliver presents to well-behaved Swiss and German children, meaning Christ child. Christkind is an angel-like figure often accompanied by St. Nicholas on his holiday missions. In Scandinavia, a jolly elf named Julmonten was thought to deliver gifts in a sleigh drawn by goats. English explains that Father Christmas visits each home on Christmas Eve to fill children's stockings with holiday treats. Pierre Noël is responsible for filling the shoes of French children. In Italy, there's a story of a woman called La Befana, a kindly witch who rides a broomstick down the chimneys of Italian homes to deliver toys into the stockings of lucky children. Now some Christmas traditions in the U.S. or the United States. So here in the U.S., Santa Claus is often depicted as flying from home to home on Christmas Eve to deliver toys to children. He flies on his magic sleigh, led by his reindeer, Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid, Donner, Blitzen, and of course the most famous reindeer of all is Rudolph. Santa enters each home through the chimney, which is why empty Christmas stockings, once empty socks, now often dedicated stockings made for the occasion, are hung by by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas would soon be there, as the poem goes. Stockings can be filled with candy canes or other treats or small toys. Now, just a little thing for my family. My grandma knitted us a stocking for each of us, and they were huge. Like, they're big, green and red stockings, and they'd get filled up with all sorts of stuff, but we never hung them on a chimney because we didn't have one. So instead, late at night, when the children are supposed to be sleeping, somebody would come in and place your stocking on your bed and then leave. And that was our Christmas tradition when it comes to stockings. Santa Claus and his wife, Mrs. Claus, call the North Pole home, and children write letters to Santa and track Santa's progress around the world on Christmas Eve. Children often leave cookies and milk for Santa and carrots for his reindeer on Christmas Eve. Santa Claus keeps a naughty list and a nice list to determine who deserves gifts on Christmas morning. And parents often invoke these lists as a way to ensure their children are on their best behavior, which we should be anyway. The lists are immortalized in the 1934 song, Santa Claus is Coming to Town. Making a list, he's checking it twice, going to find out who's naughty or nice. Santa Claus coming to town. And this part always creeped me out, just personally. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. Like I said, it just always kind of creeped me out. And the ninth reindeer, Rudolph, the most famous of all, was born 100 years after his 8 flying reindeer counterparts. The Red-Nosed Wonder was the creation of Robert L. May, a copywriter at the Montgomery Ward department store. So in 1939, May wrote so in 1839, the original reindeers were created. But he wrote a Christmas story poem to help bring holiday traffic into his store, using a similar pattern to Moore's. 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. May told the story of Rudolph, a young reindeer who was teased by the other reindeers because of his large glowing red nose. But when Christmas Eve turned foggy, and Santa worried that he wouldn't be able to deliver gifts that night, the former outcast saved Christmas by leading the sleigh by the light of his red nose. Rudolph's message that given the opportunity, a liability can be turned into an asset. So sometimes when you think something that you're doing is not good, because people make fun of it, you find out it's actually the best part about you. And that proved as a very popular point for Rudolph. And Montgomery Ward sold almost 2.5 million copies of the story in 1939. Wow. When it was reissued in 1946, the book sold 3.5 million copies. Several years later, one of May's friends, Johnny Marks, wrote a short song based on Rudolph's story. It was recorded by Gene Autry and sold over 2 million copies. Since then, the story has been translated into 25 different languages and been made into a television movie narrated by Burl Ives, which has charmed audiences every year since 1964. So, that's a little bit on Santa, the creation of him, from a real person that was a saint, patron saint of children and sailors. And, it's just fun. It's fun for the holidays. Makes me miss the snow. I always had a white Christmas growing up, and now I've gotten used to these green California Christmases. But no matter what, it's still fun to learn a little bit of history behind Santa Claus and different traditions that we have in the U.S. and throughout the world. All right. Well, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you later on. Bye.